This is Dr. Rich Schuttler again with Taking the B out of ABD, which stands for Taking the But out of All But Dissertation. This lesson strategy is to help you better understand how you could write your Chapter 4 so you can be approved sooner and produce more value in your work. This is lesson number 6 in the series of Chapter 4. And this lesson is titled Presenting Research Questions. In this lesson strategy, as you can see, it is part of a bigger series. Of the 12 different lessons, if you're listening to these in sequential order, then you've already viewed the first 5. This section here is actually part 4 of 5 different part lessons on presenting qualitative data. In this lesson in particular, I'm going to address if you're going to present your Chapter 4 by research questions, some things to consider, perhaps as compared to if you were going to present your Chapter 4 by themes. The agenda for this lesson is for me to give you information about presenting by research questions, a few examples from some of my mentees' work, and then a reflective summary. When presenting by research questions, some things to consider are 3 options. These are 3 options as I see it. One is if you have one central research question. If you have one central research question, then it makes your study what I consider to be relatively easy to report the data in Chapter 4, because then you'll just be able to provide information based on your interview questions, then find the common themes for each interview question, and then for the entire document as a whole, considering your document to be all the transcripts from all the interviews from all the questions. But perhaps you have more than one central research question, so therefore you have central research questions. If that's the case, then more than likely and hopefully you have different interview questions that align with each specific central research question. If that's the case, then you may have to divide your work in Chapter 4 differently than if you only had one research question, because you would have to run the data for the sub-questions or perhaps the interview questions that aligned with each of the individual central research questions. There is what I call a cascading approach. If you have 2 or more central research questions, and if you have sub-questions, they would be aligned to each individual central research question. Then the cascading flow goes to the interview questions, where more than likely you're going to have one or more interview question that aligns. Now, you may also have sub-questions. Sub-questions are great, and although I'm not a big advocate of them, there are times when they are needed. If you have sub-questions, then the option of presenting your research question is based on if you have sub-questions for one or more than one central research question. Then you should have, for sure, aligned interview questions for each sub-question. Let's say, for example, you have one central research question and 3 sub-questions and 8 individual interview questions. Now, out of those 8 interview questions, they should each align to one of the sub-questions. And then, of course, all the sub-questions align to the central research question. How you manage Chapter 4 and how you report based on research question is going to be dependent on which of these options you have, whether you have sub-questions or not, and whether you have more than one central research question or not. The work is not really any more difficult depending on which you have. It just determines how the chapter is going to be designed in a logical, sequential manner to be able to produce the chapter in a manner that's going to allow somebody to easily understand the data as you present it. In this chapter, I encourage you to identify which interview question supports which central research question or sub-questions. As I mentioned earlier, there should be this cascading approach. You should not have an interview question that doesn't correspond with either a sub-question or a central research question. There's nothing wrong with creating perhaps a figure and indicate which interview questions are aligned to each question, whether it be a central research question or one of your sub-questions. This makes it easy for readers of your work to understand how your work is connected and aligned. What I suggest is you take the transcripts from each interview question and assess it for common themes. Here's my example. Let's say you have interviewed 18 people and you gave them each 6 interview questions. You would take, for example, interview question number 1, all the transcripts from the 18 people you interviewed, and put them into one file and just call it something like interview question number 1. Then you would have interview question number 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And within each file, only those transcripts from that interview question. So you would end up with 6 relatively large files, and each one of those, then you run through NVivo software. You would find out what the common themes are for each individual interview question from the combination of all 18 people. You would do that with each of the 6 interview questions. Then you would have the themes from all your interview questions, and then you could align them to your sub-questions or your central research questions. And I also encourage you, at the end, once you've done all that transcription work with finding the themes from each interview question, then put all the information from all the transcripts in one file and run that through NVivo software. You should ideally get the same themes, but you may find a few new keywords or other themes that emerged perhaps subsequently because all the data was put together in one file instead of individual files by interview question. Prioritize worthy themes of noting. Now, as I indicated before in one of the prior lessons on arranging your work by themes, you're still going to have themes, but they're going to be based now on each individual research question. Thus, as you look at what themes were generated, you may have to find and create your own prioritized method. Oftentimes, I like to see things by frequency, by how many themes were generated, particularly by how many people interviewed. Let's just say you ended up with 3 major themes from all the interview questions. Well, help us understand where they came from by the interview questions, but also put them in order, indicating that the themes were emerged because maybe 14 people out of 16 indicated something. Maybe the second theme was 12 out of 18 people had alluded to that theme being developed. But also, keep in mind, it's not uncommon through dissertation research that you and your peers, when doing this type of research, will produce something that is not commonly found in the body of knowledge. This may be a worthy theme to mention early on when you start indicating your theme development by your research questions, because it may be that one new theme that you generate that nobody else has seen before, or perhaps is not as common in the body of knowledge, and you want to bring that to the attention of the reader early in your chapter. So while you are presenting by research questions, there may be the need to make a caveat and say that a certain theme was generated through perhaps research question number 1 and give what that new theme is. However you produce your information in Chapter 4, be consistent in the write-up from each interview question. As you develop the themes from each of the interview questions, in the example I provided earlier, you had 6 interview questions. However you take the data after it's been put through NVivo, whether you do a narrative and a table or figure, maybe another narrative and close out the section, be consistent in that, so that when you take your interview questions and you then use that collectively to answer your research question for your study, whether it be one central research question or more, that the write-up follows a path that's logical and it's followed through the entire chapter. In your Chapter 4, as you do this information on presenting by research questions, create an introduction that informs the reader of how the work will flow in the chapter. As you begin the introduction to your chapter, I believe it's important and critical to help the reader understand how your chapter is going to be organized. The more information you can help the reader with early on to understand how your work is being constructed in Chapter 4 and how your data is being presented, allows the reader later, years from now perhaps, to get a better understanding of what's coming in your chapter. This is kind of like giving your general introduction, let somebody know what's going to follow, then you give the material, and then you do a conclusion, kind of recapping the salient points of the chapter. Do the same process as you've been doing in your classroom assignments for years, and make this happen in your chapter 4. And think of it this way, that as somebody reads your chapter 4 who may not have read anything else in your dissertation, what do you want them to know about what they're going to find in your chapter in regards to the flow of information and how you present your data? Conclude with major themes based on research question analysis. As you conclude your chapter and you conclude this section of how you're presenting your data, conclude with the major themes based on the research question analysis. Remember, whether you have one central research question or two central research questions or even more than two, the idea is that as you have collected data, your data is then synthesized and you analyze and evaluate that data. Then you make a presentation of that data. Now, that presentation is the themes that you're generating in Chapter 4. And based on these themes, that's how you answer your central research question or questions. Answering those central research question or questions allows you then to give information to the stakeholders who are suffering the problem that you studied for your dissertation, because ideally what you want to do is provide information to them that they could use or at least consider towards lessening the problem that they're experiencing. So as you conclude your chapter 4, make sure that you conclude with the major themes based on the research question analysis, and that'll be a very powerful conclusion to your chapter. Include tables and figures to add value. I am a believer of tables and figures in Chapter 4, even at times when perhaps they're not needed. As I indicated earlier, you might put a figure in and show the cascading approach how each individual interview question aligns with a sub-question and a central research question. That's what I believe a value-added figure, because then automatically I can see if you had 6 interview questions, which one aligned with which sub-question and or central research question. I know then that there are no questions that are miscellaneous, or if there is a miscellaneous question that you added, that you then address and show how it does not align and why it does not align with one of your sub-questions. Keep in mind, all we want to do is be able to find out how you did your work and how you're presenting your data. And oftentimes, a table and a figure allows for that option, much like they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Oftentimes, these figures and tables add value to your work. If you're going to do that, again, be consistent. If you have several tables and figures and they're aligning with your research questions and how you're answering or presenting your data, make sure you do it consistently from one research question to the next. Ideally, I like to see a narrative. Then you introduce the table or figure. You then present that table and figure. But you always end that section with a narrative. I do not recommend ending any section or specific heading inside any chapter with a table and figure. This should be the easiest chapter to write so far. As you've gone through your work, if you're at the stage where you're actually writing Chapter 4, Chapter 1 was probably a struggle. It was a struggle in the sense that you had to figure out what your problem was, make sure it was dissertation worthy, start to learn how to be a researcher and put a problem statement, purpose statement together, identify your research method and design. That was probably somewhat of a challenge for you. Chapter 2 was crazy because there is no template. You had to make it up. Chapter 2 is what I believe the hardest chapter in the entire dissertation process, because you have to create it. You have to take your abstracts and put it into some linear format and then write 30 or 40 pages on it. Chapter 3 is relatively easy compared to the other first 2 chapters in a proposal because it's more of a roadmap. You indicated what the research method was and how you were going to do your research in the sense of your data collection and data analysis. Now in Chapter 4, all you're doing is presenting your data. This should be fun because you've manipulated your data, you've massaged it, you've tested it, you put it through in vivo software, you found the major themes that you want to address, and it's interesting to you. So Chapter 4 should be the easiest chapter to write so far, and from my belief, Chapter 5 is even easier. What I want to do now is share a couple examples from my mentees who have went on to graduate and indicate some examples for you to see and perhaps emulate in your work. My mentees own the copyright for their dissertations. I own the copyright for this Taking the B Out of ABD program. And they've given me written consent to use their work in efforts to help you better understand how you can do your work. We certainly hope that you'll do the same. If you ever want me to use your work in examples in future, I'd be happy to do that. Just send it to me when you're done. Send me that dissertation and a permission to use it, and I'll start looking at where I can take information from your work and adding value to my programs to help other people. So the first example is by Dr. Majid Al-Makwabi, and his graduation was in 2013. He produced a dissertation titled Perceptions of ICU Stakeholders Toward Nursing Staff Levels in Omani Hospitals, a Qualitative Case Study. You can see here in his work, he wrote it this way. Research question number 1, perceptions about nursing shortage severity. The first research question examined how stakeholder perceptions differ regarding the severity of the ICU nursing shortage in Oman. To explore these perceptions fully, stakeholders were asked about various dimensions of the problem. 5 interview questions collected insights about research question number 1. Question 1, adequate number of nurses. Question 2, nurse-patient ratios. 3A was about reasonableness of workload. 3B, manageability of workload. And 4, effectiveness of deployment. You can see table 3 in his work and see how he continued on with his chapter, but he addressed each research question by helping us better understand what the question was and how many interview questions aligned with this research question. Now, Dr. Kristeniak, in 2011, with her dissertation titled Exploring the Experiences of Complementary Therapy Nurses, a Qualitative Phenomenological Study, interview question number 2, describe your personal decision-making that prompted your use of complementary modalities. This interview question prompted discussions on treatment selection and the process of selecting complementary therapies for nursing intervention. And as you can see here, she went on to provide this narrative, and then you see in table 6 below how she indicated what the key word was, how many participants provide that by a percentage, and whether that came from participants, 1 through 13 or 14 through 16. She did her work and ran, after 13 interviews, she ran her data to find the major themes. Then she did interviews with people from number 14, 15, and 16, 3 more interviews to find out what those themes were, and that's when she decided that data saturation or theoretical saturation was achieved after 16 people. As I described in another lesson in this Chapter 4 series, that she decided to show this individually from the first 13 and then 14, 15, and 16, and then she combined it all together. So you can see her approach to describing information based on interview questions and how she went about it and how it was able then later to answer the central research question. In this short lesson, I gave you information about how to present by research questions. Again, I encourage you, if you have not already, find a couple dissertations recently published by your university with the same research method and design and see how they presented their work in Chapter 4, particularly if they addressed it by research questions. Now, there's no one way, or what I believe, no one correct way to present the data in Chapter 4. But there are many accepted ways, and I believe one of the ways is by research questions, as well as another is by themes generated. Whatever's best for your study based on the design, whether you have one research question, 2 or more central research questions, and based on how many sub-questions you might have, the design of your Chapter 4 is going to vary based on your personal choices. Again, work with your dissertation chair. Find the best way. If you're going to produce your dissertation based on having 2 central research questions, write the first one thoroughly. And then once your dissertation chair approves that, then just emulate the format for question number 2. And if you had other questions, do it the same way that way. Same as if you have sub-questions. Write it for the one central research question, then the first sub-question. Get a view on it an approval, if you will, from your dissertation chair before you go writing all the other areas in regards to other sub-questions. Once you get the format done for the first research question and the first sub-question, makes it so much easier then to produce the rest of Chapter 4. Because if you do it the same way, in what I call a cookie cutter approach, it'll be easier on you, it'll be easier on the reviewers, and it'll be much easier on the person who reads your work years from now. Then I showed you 2 examples of how my mentees have done it based on their research question and interview question. As you see, we're making progress through Chapter 4, the 12 lessons. This lesson is lesson number 6 that we just concluded. And coming up next, if you're watching these in sequential order, perhaps you're not because you just want to see certain lessons, and that's fine. But the next lesson in the plan of sequential watching and listening will be lesson number 7 of 12. And that will be the final 5-part series that discusses how to present a Chapter 4 based on qualitative data. What I'm going to do in that lesson is do a little wrap up, highlight some areas which I believe are the salient points from the prior 4 lessons, and things for you to keep in mind as you write your chapter based on qualitative data that you're presenting. It also comes in handy, all this information, the entire lesson strategy, if you're doing a mixed method study, because if you're doing a mixed method study, as you know, of course, you're doing quantitative and qualitative information. So you're going to have to be cognizant of all the information in this lesson strategy. And hopefully, by listening to these lessons, it'll give you things to think about, examples to consider, and dialogue to have with your dissertation chair about how to do your work even better than you would have otherwise. Address each question with the same approach. Stay consistent. Stay in a path that allows the reader to follow on sequentially, and you'll do extremely well. This is Dr. Rich Shuttler. I want to thank you again for obtaining this lesson strategy. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me at drrichshuttler.com. I'll reply to your emails personally. Thank you very much.